Hello, good afternoon. This is a lesson in sociology, lesson for GCSE Sociology on the AQA syllabus, and we're looking at exam questions. We're looking at exam techniques in the families section, which is on paper 1. So what I'm going to do first of all is just go through some do's and don'ts and some things about what you should be thinking about when you're doing your exams, and also then look at exam questions on last year's exam paper. Just want to briefly introduce myself. I'm Brian Dickinson. I'm a history and sociology teacher based in West Sussex. I'm also a private tutor as well. So by all means, try and get in touch with me if you want, and I'll help you out wherever I can. So I'm just going to bring up a little PowerPoint quickly, just to show you what I'm doing. Oops, no, I don't want to do that. So I just want to share screen. Here we are. Right. Going to do this. Okay, get rid of that. That's not the one. No, got the wrong one. Sorry. That's the one. Hopefully you're seeing that. So exam questions for families. Okay. So you'll be tested on what you have learned about sociology on families and methods on paper 1, okay? And it's the same for the one in education and on paper 2. Methods are incorporated now, they're not separate, okay? And each section is a quarter of your grade, 25% of your final grade. So that all the questions on families are going to all adding up will count to 25% of your final grade. You'll also be expected to know about some of the main sociologists, people you have studied. There's around about a dozen of them. Please speak to your teachers about that. And it's on the web. It's on the AQA website on the syllabus. It's a list of sociologists that you could be asked about, any one of them, and it tells you what topics they are experts in, and you could well be given some information about them to read and know something about their what ideas that they follow. The more you know about them, the better. You must know about the main theories within sociology, okay? This is a real must. What I suggest you do, I recommend that you learn what Marxists, functionists and feminists, what they have to say on every topic you study, okay? And this goes for everything that you're studying. So what do the Marxists say about this? What will the functionists say about this? What will the feminists? And a lesser extent, you might look at interactionists maybe, postmodernists sometimes, but definitely 100%, if you can know what those 3 people are saying, those 3 types of sociologists are saying on every topic, then you'll be fine. With each method you have studied, you need to know its advantages and disadvantages, and that will come apparent later on when I go through some of the questions with you. Okay, so you got to know what's good about a method of study and what's not so good about it. Okay, each method is good in its own way, and it's also it's parts of it which aren't very good. And also do what the question is asking you to do. And now that sounds really silly and obvious to say, but if it's asking you to describe, then do that. It's asking you to explain, do that. If it's saying what is wrong with something, say that. Don't go into it's become bit more apparent when we go through some of the questions. Okay, right, I'm just going to bring up now the past paper. So hopefully you're looking at the past paper now. This is last year's past paper, 2019. Okay, I am an examiner for AQA. I mark this paper. I'm a lead examiner as well, team leader. I just want to say something about these exams, how they're marked. Years ago, these exam papers was literally physically sent to each examiner, and examiners got your papers in front of them. So as an examiner, we used to know what school you were from and your name on the paper. Now we do not. They go sent back to AQA or whatever exam board you're doing it with. They are scanned into a computer, and all we see as examiners, all we see is what you write. We don't know your name, we don't know your gender, we don't know what school you go to. So do not assume that your teacher will know. Sometimes when you're in school, some of my students do this, they sometimes kind of, yeah, well, I know that. And yeah, I thought that was a bit obvious. Sometimes I didn't want to say it. Because your teachers, the person who marks your paper will not know who you are. Okay, they will have no idea who you are, whether you're good at it, whether you're bad at something, whether you've studied it for 5 years, 2 years, 6 months, or whatever. Okay, it's an hour and 45 minutes each paper. There's 100 points, so you're talking about, so it's 105 minutes. So you're talking about a point a minute. Okay. The first section is most people get these right. Okay, and these are marked by the computer because they are just literally, you fill it in there. Okay, and it's normally about keywords. What does this mean? Okay, usually what sociological perspective focuses on patriarchy and gender relationships. Okay, so you should have a bit of feminist on that one. And what term is commonly used by sociologists to describe the family consists of a couple whose children have moved out of the family home. So here is your keywords. Okay, your teachers should hopefully tell you what keywords to be learnt, and you should be learning your keywords, what they are. And there's loads of information out there to help you. Now, the next one is a 3 points. So there's quite a lot of very small questions on these. Describe a function. What does the family do? Okay, so if you remember your functionalism, what sort of things do the family do? You haven't got to go into a massive amount of detail on this one at all. You literally just got to describe what it does. Okay, most people get this one right. Reproductive, sexual function, for example. So in other words, don't you say a sexual function or reproducing. How does it happen? Give a little bit more detail. It's 3 points, 3 minutes to be writing for, and look at, you've got, quite a few lines to write. Don't just say one of the functions is to produce babies or produce the next workers. So how does it happen? Why does it happen? Okay, who might say, what type of sociologist might say produce the next workers? That type of thing. Emotional support, financial support, how does it happen? How do you support each other emotionally or financially? Okay, don't just give one word answers. Identify and describe one criticism that Marxists make about the families. Again, what does the Marxists say? This is what I'm saying about the good and bad things about everything. What do Marxists say about the family? They are critical of the family. What do they say? And explain it. Identify and describe one criticism. Okay, that it's quite they're quite negative, and the fact that the family breeds sort of because it's quite small, it's domestic violence within the family. Okay, everything's internalized. Don't get confused too much with Marxists and feminists. It's very easy to go along the patriarchy lines here about it's a very patriarchal institution. Okay, don't get caught up in it. Some Marxists would say that it's more of a feminist thing. It could be along the lines of it produces the next workers and keeping inheritance going and things like that. Okay, so get to know what, as I said, what Marxists say about each topic, and this is why you need to know it and describe it. Here is where you start now getting about methods. This is why you need to know about methods. Well, this is here, item A, using structured interviews to British social attitude. You've got to know what structured interviews are. British Social Attitude Survey conducted research into domestic division of labour. They use a nationally representative sample of couples in heterosexual relationships. The individuals involved were asked a series of questions about their attitudes and behaviours. The table below shows some of the results. And as you can see, a lot of people sometimes forget about this bit. Household tasks were undertaken by men and women between 1994 and 2012. Hopefully, you're thinking, structured interviews. What's good about structured interviews? What's not so good about them? It's national. all over the country. Only heterosexual relationships. Think about that as well. It's a limitation maybe, but it's between 94 and 2012. It's a longitudinal study. Those things you should be thinking about when you have, when you're reading this, okay? The detail of it is irrelevant to a large extent. Examine one strength of the research. Give me a strength of it, okay? It's a longitudinal study. In other words, it's over a long period of time. That's all you need to say. Okay, it's national. In other words, it conducts it over a whole of the country. Okay, there's not a lot of there in terms of it undertakes looking at men by men and women, not just women, not just men. Those are things are good about it. That's what's good about it. This is why I'm saying each topic that you, each method that you look at, you need to know the good and bad things. Question 6. Identify and explain one factor that may account for the traditional division of domestic labour as mentioned in item A. It's not asking you to go back to it to a large extent. It's saying identify and explain one factor that may account for the traditional division of labour. Okay, so just looking at my notes. Some people misread this question. Quite a lot of people did. Many of them explain factors accounting for the change in division of labour. It's not asking you why are things changed. It's not asking you that more men do domestic labour as opposed to years ago, that it's changed over. It's not asking you that. Why is there a traditional division of labour? Why is it that more women do domestic work than men? That's kind of why it's saying that. That's what it's asking you. This is my point about do what's asked of you. So, in other words, describe why is it that more women do domestic work than men? Okay, it's about socialisation, it's about what we see on TV, about what we see of our families doing it, and all the rest of it. That's why those things occur. Just think about in your own families and the families that you're studying in your lessons. Why, and when you discuss about the fact that more women do domestic work than men, why is that? Why does that happen? Okay, it's not an accident. Men are more likely to be working full time than women. Okay, those things. But you've got to explain it. Don't just say because more men go out to work. Say why that happens. Say why it is that, why don't men want to do domestic work? What is it about the attitudes of men that it's not actually about why it's getting better or getting worse? Why is that happening? Next question, 7. Identify and explain one advantage of using structured interviews. Okay, now, it says, it's not asking you about structured interviews per se. It's saying to investigate conjugal roles in relationships. So why is it a problem that if you're using structured interviews to look at conjugal roles, why is that a problem to use structured interviews? So think about generic or roughly what it is about structured interviews that's not very good. Okay, that you can't go off into tangents, you can't ask supplementary questions, you've got to use the same questions for everybody. It's structured. That's what structured interviews are like. And why is that a problem with this? Now, one of the reasons you might come across is lots of people, lots of families are all very different. And you might find some families are very separate. Some families work really well together, but you can't follow those rules. You can't follow those lines of investigation with this particular type of method. So you've got to know what's wrong with structured, what the limitations of structured interviews. But you've got to relate it to this. If you only talk about the structured interviews on their own, you won't get that many points. You probably get 2 out of 4. Okay. Now, one of the things that quite a good thing to look at, if you can, as a general thing, is an examiner's report. After each year, when all the exams are done, and the chief examiner for each topic writes a report of how well the common mistakes. If you can't get hold of one, ask your teacher for looking at it. Ask your teacher to go through it. I do it with my students. It gives you really good tips. And on this particular question, since most students gained some credit and wrote about an appropriate disadvantage based on the interviewer's inability to ask follow-up questions, as I was saying, or inability to elaborate, explain their answers. Okay, now, responses focused on the interviewer effect tended to be weaker. So this thing, a common mistake when people are talking about interviews or anything about getting research is that a common mistake is saying, well, people might not tell you the truth. I can, speaking as an examiner now, you will not get credited for that, because on every method you use, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's interviews, structured interviews, unstructured interviews, surveys, online, whatever, people can lie. You don't know that. Okay, it's a general thing about all methods. You don't know whether or not they're really telling you the truth. So please steer away from, oh, people might not tell you the truth. It really doesn't help you at all. Okay. It's not asking you for an alternative method. It's not saying a better method would be to use this. It's not asking you that at all. It's asking you to explain. It's what they're trying to find out is, do you understand what structured interviews are like? And is this an appropriate method to use on this particular one? Now, all methods are good and all methods have got limitations. Years ago, when we used to do coursework, we used to get people to choose a method and think about what's good or not so good about it. Item B, Anne Oakley. You should hopefully know a little bit about Anne Oakley. She defined conventional families as nuclear families composed of legally married couples voluntarily choosing the parenthood of one or more children, with parents and children living together in a distinctive domestic unit. Oakley suggested that if judged by statistical data alone, conventional family life was no longer the norm. However, she noted that the idea remained a powerful feature of our society. Oakley based her analysis on a review of available data, including the work of other sociologists. Item B, from item B, identify and describe the research method she used, and what you know of her perspective. So you've got to know that Anne Oakley was a Marxist, okay, or sorry, she was a feminist. You've got to understand she's a feminist, a little bit about her, okay, and her method. So it's questionnaires or structured interviews. That's what she was looking at, okay? That's kind of what you're looking at. So please, this here. This just shows you why you've got to read it properly, and also you've got to look at why, a little bit about Anne Oakley itself, okay? Got to know that she's a feminist, and why she would look at this in a particular way. Why is she interested in this? Why is she going to look at the role of men and women in families? The next one is you always get this in your exams. Identify one ethical issue you would need to consider when investigating attitudes towards arranged marriage. Explain how you would deal with the issue of your investigation. Ethical issues. Please understand what the ethical problems are. Okay, it's always ethical issue. It always comes up in your exams. If you we do other papers later on, you'll see it again. Ethical issue. You're talking about arranged marriage. So if you're talking to someone about arranged marriage, what's the problem you've got there? It's a tricky subject, isn't it? It's a sensitive subject. How are you going to deal with it? Well, you might make sure that the people who are going to talk to you are not identified, that the stuff that they're going to tell you is confidential. You're not going to spread it around. You're not going to identify them. They're going to be anonymous. Okay, that's what you need to explain on that one. Please make sure that when you're in your lessons, you understand what ethical issues are. Now, this next part of the lesson, we're going to do a bit later is about 12 mark questions. So hopefully you'll come back to that. Hopefully you've got something out of there. And if I can stop sharing, come back to there. Next one's going to look at 12-mark questions and how them. That's a difficult subject. That's a topic all on its own. Hopefully I'll see you again. That's that 20-minute lesson done and dusted for you. Hopefully you've learned something from there, and I'll speak to you again soon.